What's up, everybody? One Fun Guy podcast in the studio. I'm just hanging out a little bit tonight before I go live with Kel. We're going to talk about Forbes' 38 top heavy metal bands and how much that list is kind of awful. Like I said last night, they did a good job at least putting metal on the map for mainstream. So kudos to them for doing that, but they got that list way wrong. Wrong-ish, I guess. They got some things right, but a lot of things wrong. So we're going to talk about it. So we're going to be live at 8 o'clock. I just hopped on a little bit early just to say what's up, see if anybody's on and wants to hang out for a little bit. Hey, Sylvia, what's going on? So we're just kind of hanging out tonight, guys. Until we get on and talk about that list, we're just kind of doing our thing. Or at least I'm doing mine right now. Kel will join me in a little bit. We're just, like I said, kind of just hanging out, making it a fun, low-key night. And then we're going to talk about the possibility of changing things up. So we can go from there and then, see what happens. So, regardless of that, we'll go from there. So, I hope everybody had a great Saturday, that it was productive and fun and enjoyable. And if you have a 3-day weekend for Columbus Day on Monday, awesome. If you don't, things could be worse, right? So, we'll just kind of do that and see what's happening and go from there. And it'll be a fun night tonight, though. I'm looking forward to hopping on with Kel. I did my podcast last night, the One Fun Guy podcast. Mike was a great guest. That video is live on YouTube right now. So if you head over to my YouTube account, One Fun Guy podcast, and you come across that video, go ahead and like it, give it a thumbs up, and we'll go from there. So that'll be awesome. Well, happy birthday. Nails done for the birthday. So we'll see what happens, guys, right? We're just kind of rocking and rolling and, doing our own thing. We're living our lives, and we all got stuff going on, and we kind of all have things happening. So, happy birthday to Sylvia. If anybody else has a birthday out there, happy birthday. Thank you guys for tuning in tonight, kind of hanging out and going from there. Like I said, we'll see what's happening. I'm going to post this to a few of my friends. One of them is already on, so that'll be awesome. I'm just going to share my live to Kel. If he hops on, that's great. I don't know. We don't really have a time restriction or anything like that. So I'm going live now. I'm waiting for Kel to join. We're just going to be doing our Pod Cult podcast tonight, guys. We're going to do it on here. We find that TikTok is easier to do it. So we're just kind of hanging out and doing our thing. And I'm just waiting for him to hop on. And then it'll just be, like I said, guys, a fun show. It's not going to be super long tonight. Where hold on, I'm just texting Cal, getting everything back on the same page. But if you guys are on and you're hanging out, guys, if you like the show, that's awesome. I'd appreciate the likes. You guys do not need to send me gifts, please. Keep that for friends who earn it and want it. I'm just doing this for fun, guys. If you send me gifts, I appreciate it, and I like it, guys. I do, but I'm not asking for that, right? I just want this to be a fun live. Beth, what's up? I just want this to be a fun live, nice, easy going, smooth. If you like what you see, guys, and you hit the like button, that's awesome. That helps me out a lot. But I'm not going to sit here and beg you guys to tap my face or tap my nose or touch the screen or do whatever you want to do from that point on. We're just hanging out tonight, guys. I'm waiting for Cal to hop on. He will be joining me in a little bit. We had our show set for 8, but I just told him I was on hanging out. So this might be him joining me now. We'll get into what we were going to talk about a little bit earlier. with everything that we had going on for tonight. So we're just kind of waiting for that to happen. And then once we do, what's up, buddy?
Hey, what's going on?
So not much. We're just kind of hanging out. We're just doing our thing. I just came on a little bit early to tell everybody about my podcast that I did last night and to encourage everybody to watch us at 8. But since we're here now, we can start. We're rocking and rolling, as they say. So
Do your thing. I'll hang out.
no, this is it. This is our thing now. So I told everybody last night about the precursor, the Forbes list, and I kind of went on my little rant about it. But I did acknowledge the fact that I am appreciative of the fact that they did it for the metal community, right? So I do give kudos where kudos is due. So Forbes, they're more of a money magazine. They've done a lot of stuff with other, like the top 100 greatest rock bands, and they've done other stuff. But to do a list specifically on metal, I give them props for that. So Forbes, good job for doing that. You kind of got it wrong, but at least you did it right. So it's and that's debatable, right? Some people are in that. I questioned a lot of what was on that list, and I don't necessarily question the order as much as just a few of the bands that were on there. So with that being said, we'll get started. We'll hop right into it. Well, what did you think of the list first?
Yeah, no, I mean, to start, yeah, you're right. It's Forbes, right? And they're a money magazine. So, I guess it's, taken 40 years or so for metal to be considered something to be, noticed by the financial community, right? But when you think about it, there are some big bands out there that are significant contributors to economy and stuff like that, like Metallica touring or the big bands that are going there. They might not be Taylor Swift, right? But it's still a significant industry to get noticed. So that's cool that it's but it's a double-edged sword, right? To some extent, the beauty of being in the community is that it's a little bit off the mainstream and, don't necessarily want to be recognized by Forbes. And just by seeing that Forbes made a list, when I first saw that the article existed, I was kind of like, okay, they're going to get it wrong. So I went in totally biased and but but then again, being who I am, it's like, well, maybe they still will, but I would be very surprised if they did, right? But
and
it
they
seemed
did
to
a
me
lot
very much.
right? Like at least from my perspective is they got some of the stuff right. It's just not all right. So they're not all wrong either. But like you touched on, it's a money magazine. So I think their list is going off of not so much notoriety, but just overall gross. And some of the bands have an extensive catalog that dates a lot of the other bands. They've been doing it for 50 plus years versus some bands who are just maybe hit their 20-year mark or maybe hitting their 15, some 10-year marks, right? So it's an obscure list, but it's purely based on I think money and not so much the actual band, right? So when you look at it from that perspective on things, right? Now, a lot of it goes to modern day, right? With concert sales, right? You mentioned Metallica, right? When Black Sabbath went on tour in 1976, their concert tickets were $8, $6. Metallica's charging $5,000 for their press seats, right? So you're talking on a if you have 25,000 people at a Black Sabbath show in 1977, and you have 20,000 or 25,000 people at a Metallica show, well, just by sheer numbers with the current market value, Metallica is going to outsell them 100 to 1 every day. But if you were to take Black Sabbath in their prime and put them now, those numbers would be very different.
Yeah, you're touching on a good point there, but I think it is people pay what they think it's worth, and bands charge what people will pay.
That's it.
That's a cold hard truth, unfortunately, right? If you're looking at your run of the middle range type of touring metal bands, even the ones that we consider huge, like the Meshuggahs or whatever, right? You'd be hard pressed to see them charging more than $40 or something like that, right?
Right.
And even at $40, they probably have 2 or 3 supporting bands that are,
Sure.
notable still, right? So it is the top tier that can charge that stuff, and whether that's right or wrong, we kind of talked about it before with Metallica or whatever, right? That they've lost touch with where they came from, and they've turned into an economy of they've turned into a money machine as opposed to being about the art, right? But you're totally right, and I wasn't there when Black Sabbath played in 76, 77, but maybe people thought it was outrageous that they charged $8 instead of the usual $5.
Sure.
I mean, I wasn't there, but
Everything's perspective.
That could have been true, right? But it was also, but it's also about volume. Like if you fill a stadium and people pay, X amount of dollars, but there's 80,000 people there, and obviously make a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I think you're absolutely right. Like in terms of the Forbes list, right? It might not have been so much how much money that individual band made, but rather how much impact they had on that economy, because they could have so I prepared for this podcast, right? So I did a bit of my top list is more or my list of bands is more people that or bands that I think had an impact, that were far reaching. So that even in economical terms could spread out, right?
Yeah. So I when I did my list, I did the same thing. I did impact, but I also considered money of merchandise, ticket sales, concerts, and also their impact on the music scene, right? Because there was one band, and it might be the same band we're thinking of, that made the Forbes list, and they were very, very high up, much higher than I would have expected. And I don't consider them a metal band at all. And so if you take that style of music and that genre, there were 3 bands that came to mind right off the bat that you can argue they're metal or not, that would have sold way more albums than them and made a lot more money, and they didn't make the list. And I don't know if you want me to just go ahead and say it, but it's, for me, it was the Deftones, right? I don't consider the Deftones a metal band by any stretch of the imagination, and they might fit into the new metal category of hard rock, but nothing against the Deftones or the Deftone fans. But when you're putting them on a list with Cannibal Corpse and Carcass, they're not in that list, right? But Limp Bizkit comes to mind, right? Limp Bizkit was one of the highest grossing bands of the 2000s, and they didn't make the list. So you put the Deftones on there. I don't know where they got that, right? Like, I don't know where that comes into play and who decided on the list to put them on there. And then surprisingly, 2 bands that came to mind right off the top of my head weren't even on the list. And I know one of the person made more money probably in movies. It'll give it away of who I'm talking about, but made a lot of albums with both of his bands, Solo and White Zombie, right? No, it's Rob Zombie wasn't on the list. And I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, I didn't think that it was Alice Cooper from Prince of Darkness.
Right. But... So it's just, I don't know, so they did get a few things right, and I will give them credit for that. I give them credit for making the list, but there were a lot of bands that were on that list that I just kind of scratched my head at. And no disrespect to the bands that made the list. It's just that I thought there were a few bands that should have been on the list that weren't, and I could kind of see where they were going with this. But then, I'm a huge King Diamond fan and a huge Merciful Fate fan. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how he makes the top 38 when a band like Testament isn't on that list. I find it weird. So, and again, So I don't know. Do you want to just start with our list and see where we go
Yeah,
from
I
there?
was just going to say, we talked about Forbes and Distant for a while. So how about I mean, I think it would be a good idea to just do the rundown of our lists. We can start with you, and then I'll do mine, and then we can, compare it with the Forbes list and stuff, and see where it ends up.
Sure.
Does that sound like a
So
good idea?
yeah, so I started at number 20, and one of the bands would have been 21, 20, or somewhere in there. And for my 20, I started with Motorhead, but it very easily could have been Slipknot, right? So that's where my list started, going from 20 to 1. So right above
And that's
them,
an
I have
interesting 30-year gap between those two, right?
right.
Or
And
40.
so again, with Motorhead, right? I'm not judging it by their album sales solely because they sold more merchandise. If you go to any heavy metal concert, there's Motorhead t-shirts till this day. They had their impact on movies. They had their impact on booze. Jack Daniels did a Motorhead run. A lot of alcohol companies have done Motorhead branded alcohol. They have the jean jackets. Motorhead was kind of the first patch that ever gets put on a jean jacket if you're doing a band jacket. So they have their place in rock and roll history. So I took that approach, but Slipknot gets their due, right? I'll give them that. They didn't make my top 20, but they easily could have. They're right on the cusp. So then at number 19, I had Gojira, for obvious reasons. At number 18, I had Typo Negative. At number 17, I had Meshuggah. At number 16, I had Testament. At 15, I had Lamb of God. At 14, I had Rob Zombie / White Zombie. At 13, I had Opeth. At 12, I had Anthrax. At 11, I had Korn. 10, I had Rammstein. 9, I had Dio. 8, I had Megadeth. 7, I had Metallica. 6, I had Slayer. 5, I had Pantera. 4, I had Kiss. 3, I had Judas Priest. 2, I had Iron Maiden, and 1, I had Black Sabbath. So that's so my top 5 of Forbes list, 3 of the 5 bands are Forbes top 5. But again, Kiss did not make that list. You can argue if they're heavy metal or not, which would have put Guns N' Roses on that list, which would have put Motley Crue on that list, would have put a lot of the 80s hair metal bands. I kind of stayed away from that, but I think Kiss is strong enough in the music scene where they should be on any heavy metal list just for their legacy alone. And how many hard rock and heavy metal bands, when they are asked who their favorite band is, not who the best one is, but who their favorites are, Kiss is always top 2 of most of their list. So for them to be knocked out of by Forbes is just kind of weird to me, because they just sold their entire Kiss catalog for it was like 750 million, and their royalties are at like 400 million. So you're talking 1.2 billion dollars that they just made in the last year selling everything Kiss to whoever conglomerate bought it. So they have to be on that list by pure dollars alone, right? So I don't know. I just find it weird that they didn't make the list. So that was my top 20. And I people are probably going to say I got it wrong, but that's mine.
I struggle with the Kiss issue. And I went the Forbes way, and I did not include them just because they musically they feel more like they are heavy rock, almost classic rock, not necessarily metal to me, but their influence on metal is massive. Like you could argue that they're first ones, even though it's not corpse paint, but they were the first ones to have the black and white face paint type thing, and spitting blood and all that horrific stuff, right? So and I made a post on that on my TikTok early on when that was awesome, by the way. There's a Kiss World in Vegas at the hotel that I was staying, so that was fucking awesome. But I decided in the end, just because of the music, to not include them in mine. My top 20 is not so much a ranking in terms of best versus worst, but my top 20 is more of a timeline.
Okay, and can I just say one thing before you start your top 20?
Absolutely.
There is never a single list in the history of music where I will ever put Metallica in front of Pantera on anything. So that goes for the record. So if we ever do this again, you will never ever see Pantera behind Metallica on any of my lists. I'm just putting that on the record.
Yeah.
So,
And I think technically with my list being chronological, I think that kind of also goes from 1 to 20, like, in descending order. Because it's so hard to imagine number 2 existing after number 1 happened in a way, right? I know that I have it jumbled a little bit. But I think that's some of it. And you could also argue that, so my first one, I'll get started. I'll have a soft start, right?
Sure.
But Black Sabbath, it was a natural thing to happen with Led Zeppelin happening, with, Deep Purple doing what they were doing, and, all that stuff. It was just a matter of time of some band doing what Black Sabbath ended up doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that there would have been some group of people that would have done something similar, that would have gotten something similar done. I don't care, though. I don't care. Black Sabbath did it with the people they have, and they have an enduring, massive influence, right? So yeah, I'll go through my list here. So I'll is that okay? Or
yeah, go ahead. Go for it. Nope.
Okay.
Go.
So I'll start with Black Sabbath because they started it. It's I think it's more or less consensus, and then people can say that such and such whatever, but I think it's consensus that Black Sabbath started metal, right? Then I put Judas Priest. People don't realize how early Judas Priest were. Like, they were 74, 75, and they were the ones that put on the leather and the rivets and that stuff that is essential to all metal looks and anywhere. Like, they were the ones that put on the leather and the rivets. I have to put Motorhead in there just because they've influenced so many people. I don't think stylistically, I think that they've probably influenced punk rock more than metal. Huge influence on metal bands, but not that many bands. I mean, you could say Entombed in the mid 90s that they might have sounded like Motorhead or whatever, right? But it's more of a thing that they were there, right? And the attitude of them and all that stuff. Then I put Dio, because Dio were the ones that sort of got the whole devilly thing. I mean, the dangerous occult thing. I mean, obviously Black Sabbath had done that, but I think, with the vocals that Ronnie James had and all that stuff, like it really took things in a new direction there. And
what's
then
up, Jess? I saw you joined. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Candy. Hello. Or who was it?
Jess and Candy joined.
Nice. Good. Awesome. All right. Iron Maiden, obviously, but, for many reasons. But the biggest reason to me is that when I grew up, pretty much every metalhead started with either Kiss or Iron Maiden. That was the sort of the gateway thing. So everybody wanted to be Maiden. Then here's the one that you didn't have on your list, and that's Venom. I skew towards the extreme metal stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where I live. But
so Venom would have made my top 30 because they were one of the bands that didn't make the list that should have been on there. So
Venom, I put them on there because they were the first ones to take it to a really dark place, right? Where most metal bands are in now, like really offensive territory, right? But Venom sort of took the first steps into there, and then I got another band that you didn't have on your list there, and that's Bathory. And people don't realize how early Bathory were either. Their first album was in '84. Black metal. As much as Venom sort of invented it, Bathory took it to where it is and where it still is today.
So let me ask a quick question. You may know the answer. Was Venom or Possessed first in terms of that style? Because Possessed was like right there, and I know they get passed over a lot, but that first Possessed album was awesome. And I think that was like early 80s.
Yeah, I think that's a contentious point too. Like, as in, when did they form and did they do the first
Right.
recordings, but all that stuff, right? But at the end of the day, Possessed weren't really known to people as much as Venom were,
Sure.
or as much as people in the underground,
Hmm.
like Possessed, or Larry, the guitar player, being part of Primus later.
Yeah.
As funny as that sounds, I don't think that the impact of Possessed was as much of any of the others when we think about it in those terms.
Hmm.
Like
Sure.
they may have been before, but they didn't
Right.
have as much of an impact as Bathory or Venom in my mind.
Yeah. What's up, Justin? What's up, Kathy? Thanks for hopping on.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm just reading my list. It's not.
No, you're good. Keep your list is good. I like it.
And people, I'm reading through my list. If you disagree, this is all good. And I am not doing the Forbes thing. I am thinking about the most influential bands
Sure.
in terms of who drove the scene forwards and
Right.
expanded the art form. That's kind of where I'm coming from. So after Bathory, I did put the classics. Now that's where Metallica comes in. That's when
Hmm.
Slayer comes in. So I had to put both Metallica and Slayer. Um, and there are so many other bands there that could be lumped into that thing. Like,
Sure.
I don't have Megadeth, I don't have Exodus, I don't have those guys, because I kind of
Yeah.
feel like Slayer represent the extreme side, and Metallica more the mainstreamy type of side of things going from there. Um, and then I go to, it's kind of a double here, and it's the Scandinavian metal, which is Entombed and At the Gates, which more or less just
Mhm.
defined what would later become the extreme metal. Like, they defined death metal,
Right.
Entombed being the more brutal side, and At the Gates being more the melodic side. It was hard, it was too hard for me to pick one, so I'll lump them
Right.
into one name: At the Gates, Entombed. Um, and pretty much at the same time, I still have to say Morbid Angel / Death being the American side of death metal, which was more or less, defining death metal as well.
Hmm.
So, Morbid Angel and Death. There were other people, other bands too, like Dayside,
Yeah.
whatever. But I think it was such a toss up there too between, they were both Florida bands. Like, it was definitely a
Yeah.
Florida scene that happened
Yeah.
there.
And then you lump like Cannibal Corpse into that. Obituary is also in that. Like, they're all from Florida. They're all kind of that scene. So they're just that was kind of the
Yeah.
breeding ground for that era of death metal. That was kind of they were the hardcore, where the Bay Area was thrash metal and Florida was like the hardcore death metal scene. So
Yeah, and the Bay Area happened a bit earlier, right?
sure.
I think
Yeah.
that the Bay Area thing, made the death scene happen. And I mean,
Yeah.
Chucky was from Ohio or something, but moved down to Florida, so
Right. Yeah.
but
So Death and all those bands that kind of did it first kind of all were in that circle of people that all developed. And again, it's kind of like, when you had the Bay Area of California and all these band members were entwined in each other's bands, right? Kerry King played for Metallica, and like, they all tried out for each other's bands and they were all in. It's kind of the same
yeah,
way down there, right? Chuck Schuldiner could have went to any band and not have formed Death and would have been phenomenal, right? Like, he could have been in
yeah,
Cannibal Corpse, he could have been in, Obituary, he could have been in, all those guys were all floating around. So it's the same kind of concept that they just kind of picked their way through. And then even before the Bay Area, right, you kind of had the LA scene in the 80s, right, where all that eclectic group of hair metal guys all played in each other's bands, right? That
hmm,
the LA Guns formed out of Guns N' Roses, and them being what were they, LA Rose, right? So they LA Guns took the gun side of things, Roses took the Roses side, right? They were all in each other's bands, so that's kind of
yep,
how, so arguably any one of those death metal guys in Florida could have been in each other's bands. They all were friends. And
yeah. And I mentioned Larry from Possessed being, being in Primus, but Les, the bass player of Primus, he basically said no to the to being the Metallica player after Cliff Burton died. So there's it's all that cross contamination, right? It's really cool. But yeah, so anyway, to move on. After the Morbid Angel death thing, and this is kind of an unfortunate thing, but I put the Deicide Mayhem Burzum kind of people in a bunch there, which is the serious black metal. I was thinking about should I put it in there because Bathory sort more or less defined it, but Bathory had the distance to it. But then there were the people that really put it into practice that has been destructive and have really impacted the scene and the music and the perception in a negative way. And that's why I wanted to put them on there, because there definitely have been bands that have had an impact, that have pulled things backwards, that have, detracted from the art form by doing stupid shit. Deicide in retrospect, Glenn Benton, he only branded himself with an iron in his forehead, so it wasn't that bad. But the Norwegians definitely did some stupid shit,
and they also took
it definitely hurt shit.
Yeah, and it was more of the satanic occult that they brought into the music, right? So that was the big thing, right? The imagery, the art, the upside down crosses, like they took it to that like next level of darkness. I mean, there's no other way really to say it, and it became a phenomenon in that area, right? In Denmark, Sweden, Norway, that was.
Yep. Well, the problem was that up until that point, it had all been sort of more or less fiction, imagery, fantasy, whatever, offensive stuff. Let's see who can go harder or whatever, right? They crossed the line of actually turning it into real life stuff. They actually, there were murders, there were, the church burnings or whatever, right? So it was people that let the artistic expression turn into reality, and that was really bad. And it's sad to see that some people still kind of think that they did the right thing. I mean, it's people can have any religious views they want. Right. I don't care, but just don't hurt people. Don't damage property. Don't don't be destructive. Okay, we can all disagree, and that's fine. But I think that the acts of the people that were trying to go as far as they could possibly get at the time did so much damage to the other 99% of the metal community that was trying to do some constructive art in the dark realm of things. But anyway, after that, I put Pantera. I'm not a huge Pantera fan. I don't know much about them, but I know their impact, and they were definitely part of that whole thing when everything blew up, when grunge was coming around, when Nirvana was happening, and all that stuff. People got interested in guitar-based stuff in the mainstream, and Pantera were definitely a big part of that. So Pantera, and they are fucking awesome. I can't deny that. I don't know why I never got into them, but it was probably because they were a little bit. They went straight into the mainstream after being glam rock almost, and that wasn't my scene at the time. But they still sound like a good mix between Rage Against the Machine and Helmet in a way, right? Okay, and then we get into the when people really start to experiment. So that's the Ministry stuff. I could have put Nine Inch Nails, but I think the Ministry are more metal than the Nine Inch Nails. Then I put Meshuggah, just because they started to do the crazy shit. That's been hugely influential. Then I put Opeth, because of the symphonic elements of it, and like that going back to the 70s Genesis-y type of things a little bit more. I have to acknowledge nu metal. Korn were fucking awesome when they came out, but
they were.
the first one or two Deftones kind of sound like Korn, and I'm sorry, but I have to acknowledge that, the Limp Bizkits and the Slipknots or whatever on the planet, you sort of like rode that wave, and it's metal. What can I say? Not my cup of tea, but
Sure.
There we go. And then mid-late 90s industrial stuff like Marilyn Manson, Rammstein, that sort of thing. I think, that also deserves a mention. I think that the Dillinger Escape Plan introduced the math rock type of thing. I could be wrong. I'm not very educated in that scene, but I think that they were the ones that kind of introduced the math rock thing, which is it's not mainstream, it's not accessible to the thing, but I think it's hugely influential in the development of metal. And the last one I put a question mark on because I didn't really know who to put on there, but I said Septic Flesh, and they're the ones that do more like symphonics, like let's turn into an orchestra thing, which I feel like is the next thing. Anyway, my list went on for way longer than yours. I'm sorry, but
no, it's fine. So like, I will say this though, right? If I was going to add 18 more bands to this list, a lot of the bands you had mentioned, I would have put on my list. So like Nightwish would have definitely made my list. They made Forbes's list, right? But I have the problem with Forbes's list, right? They put Carcass at 38. Now Carcass was awesome for what they did in their time period. But
I didn't even mention, I missed my Napalm Death bullet.
Yeah,
sorry.
So and that's where I was going with this, right? You had bands like Napalm Death and Witchery that were just as good as Carcass was, yet why did they pick Carcass out of all those bands, right? So my questioning of their list is weird, right? So going into the next one, right? They put Behemoth was, I think, like 36 or 37, right under Carcass, which I'm totally fine with that. But you can't put them on because Cradle of Filth sold more albums, they sold more merchandise, so if you're going to go black metal, you have to acknowledge Cradle or Demu as being the bigger, more selling band than Behemoth. And I'm not knocking Adam and what they did for, the Polish black metal scene. But if you're going black metal and you're going to put Behemoth on that list, but you're going to exclude Cradle of Filth. Now, I know Cradle of Filth sold more albums than Behemoth. They've sold way more merchandise. They've toured a lot longer. So why did Forbes pick Behemoth over Cradle or Demu? It doesn't make sense. And that's where I think the argument could be had with the Forbes' list, because you're probably had somebody somewhere that, like we said, Forbes is a money magazine. So there might have been 2 or 3 metalheads that said, hey, let's put this list together and just give me 40 of your favorite bands, give me 40 of your favorite bands, give me 40 of your favorite bands, and whoever has the most eclectic group of things, that's going to be our list, because a lot of the stuff just doesn't make sense the way that they slotted them, or the way that they picked one band over another band over another band. And like I said, I'm not knocking Behemoth. I love them, right? They're a great band. But you can't tell me that they've sold more albums or more merchandise than Cradle has. They just haven't.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what makes them on the list over them. And then again, I question a lot of the other bands that didn't make the list. If you're going to put the Deftones on there, you can't tell me that the Deftones has sold more albums than Disturbed has. And if sold, like, they just haven't. And so, like, you put bands that didn't make that list on there, where Disturbed sold way more albums than the Deftones ever would have, yet they didn't make the list, but the Deftones did. Like, it's just a weird, like, eclectic thing, right? And I don't know. And again, I'm not knocking the people who made the list, but, when you take somebody, like I said, White and Rob Zombie, right? Rob Zombie sold a bunch of stuff. Now, we argued Motorhead in the punk scene, right? But if you're going to put horror punk or metal on there and you leave the Misfits out, the Misfits have not sold many albums, but their merchandise is huge. You go everywhere, you see the Crimson Ghost. So in terms of just purely sales of merchandise, the Misfits have to be a top 10 band. There's no way they cannot be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
over the course of doing it from 1978 till now, I mean, that's 50 years of merchandising. and high grossing. At one point, they were Hot Topics #1 seller when they had the resurgence of the band in 2009. Steph, what's up? So
Hey,
I don't know. I
Steph.
just find this list, I don't want to say bizarre or obscure, but I just question the why, right? I'd love to have the author of that article and the editor of that article explain their stance of why they picked this, right? Because again, it is Forbes and it is money, but there are other bands on that list that have made way more money than the bands that are on the list. So it can't just be album sales alone or ticket sales or merchandise, because there's bands that have sold tenfold over the bands that made that list. So that's where I question the why did one band over another band make the list, right? And we could be judgmental, right? Like I'm a huge Obituary fan. As far as death metal goes, I think they are top notch. But they didn't sell that many albums. They didn't sell that many shirts. They didn't sell that. I like them, but I can't put them on the list knowing that they're just a favorite band of mine. But they haven't done that. But you have bands like, Anthrax and Testament that were very low on that list that I thought should have been way higher. These guys have been doing it for a lot longer than a lot of the other bands that made that list. And again, you are 1,000% correct with like the Korn and the new metal bands, because Rage Against the Machine didn't make that list, but Rage Against the Machine sold how many thousands and millions of albums when it mattered, right? When you were actually selling physical copies of a record, they didn't make the list. Now people will argue they're not metal. I get that, but they should have been on that list, right? You if you're going to put the Deftones on there, you put Rage Against the Machine on that list. They hit tens down, and they would have been in my top 38.
They're anti-Forbes,
right? But again, they monopolized on record sales, album sales, touring more than any other band did, right? They were the biggest band. They took over, and you have a lot of the other ones. And now another name, again, you can argue metal, you can argue country, you can argue, but you can't take away the album sales and the merchandising of Kid Rock, right? Like whether you like him or not, his place and time of that era was huge. Same with Soundgarden, same with Alice in Chains. They didn't make the list. You can argue alternative versus metal, but if you were to put a heavy metal album together, how do you not put Soundgarden on that list? How do you not put Alice in Chains on that list?
I think you have a very good point there, right? The grunge thing, that was also something I was agonizing over when we agreed on this topic, right?
Right.
Because the grunge scene, the big names that we all know and love, like the Pearl Jams and the Alice in Chainses and the Soundgardens or whatnot, right? Soundgarden, I would say that they are actually metal. I would say that they are metal. Alice in Chains, hard rock.
Sure.
Pearl Jam, hard rock at best, type of thing. Like I wouldn't call them metal.
Right.
But here's the thing: like, where did the grunge scene come from? It came from The Accused. It came from Melvins. It came from like some really hardcore bands that were in that area that were playing hard, heavy music, and then they sort of like Green River, that then turned into the grunge scene that was arguably the biggest money-making music movement in the first half of the 90s, right? So how can we not say that Melvins, which was like sort of the godfathers of grunge, or Mudhoney, or those people, like how can we not include them in this sort of thing? Well, because the people at large don't know them. Right. That's a bit of the problem that we're facing here, right?
Right, but then you could take that same argument and you can argue Carcass. If I went and said Carcass is a top 38 metal band, you would say who? Like if I said Rage Against the Machine, if I said Disturbed, if I said any of those bands, you'd be like, oh yeah, I know Disturbed. Even if you're not a metalhead, you know who they are. You know who Rage is. And
there's a really good case to sorry to cut you off, but there's a really good case to be made for Disturbed. There's a really good case to be made for Evanescence or however
yeah,
you pronounce it, right?
right.
Which I would totally say that they're metal, they're cheesy, but I would still put them in square in the metal category, or Godsmack, or Nickelback, even for that matter. Like Nickelback are generally more metal than the cheesy ballad songs or whatever, right? I'm sorry, but they play mostly, really hard rock, at least borderline metal. But we don't want to acknowledge that.
No, right? And so that's the thing, right?
But it'll be interesting to see what methodology Forbes did in terms of coming up with their, did they just do a walk up and down Wall Street type of thing? And it's like, I love that.
And a lot of the bands on that list, it makes sense, right? When you have a band like Pantera, Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, they're gonna make that list, right? You know who they are, they're recognizable. If I said, hey, do you know who Megadeth is? And you say, I've never heard of Megadeth before in my life, but everybody knows who Megadeth is. They've heard that name, right? Yeah. So you can argue that. But there were some bands on that list that were just like, if I was gonna pick a band in that genre, I wouldn't have picked that band, right? And again, I'm not knocking like bands like System of a Down. They had their time and place. But you can't tell me that System of a Down sold more albums than White and Rob Zombie did. They just didn't. And I don't know where they got it. And, and it's the same thing, right? Like they put Typo Negative on that list. I'm happy that they did that, right? For the scene and what they did. But then you don't put Biohazard on that list. So if you're going to take a band like Typo Negative, Biohazard should be on that list by default. If you're going to use that as an argument for your, bands. And I'm just kind of looking at the list right now, like Mastodon. Awesome that they made the list. They would have been in my top 38. They just didn't crack my top 20. Dream Theater, Caius, right? If you're going to put Caius on the list, right, which is awesome. But if I said Caius to 20 people and I said Queens of the Stone Age to 20 people, Queens of the Stone Age is going to register more than Caius would have, even though Caius is the more heavier, edgier band. But why didn't Queens of the Stone Age make the list over Caius? Because it's the same genre, the same singer, the same band. They just
not quite.
But I'm just saying.
With you. But I am I'm totally with you. Like I actually had that thought when
but
don't get dirty thoughts in your mind. But when I was in the shower this morning, I was like, Caius. I have to remember to put Caius on my list, and then I forgot about it.
But Caius, from their first 4 albums, if you were to take the total grossing sales of Caius and you compare them with the first 4 Queens of the Stone Age album, you can't tell me the Caius albums are outselling Queens of the Stone Age. They're just not.
No, you're absolutely right.
But why did they pick Caius over Queens of the Stone Age in this article? It doesn't make sense. And the genre, right? I prefer Caius over Queens of the Stone Age any day of the week. But if you're going by purely album sales, concerts, and venues, Josh Homme made way more money and sold way more tickets under Queens of the Stone Age than he ever did under Caius with Nick Oliveri. And those guys are fantastic, right? But Queens of the Stone Age, in terms of pure volume, is a much bigger band. But they put Caius on the list, right? And again, Napalm Death made the list, right? Which is awesome. Converge made the list. Now, again, they put Danzig on there, but they didn't put the Misfits on there, which the Misfits outsold Danzig tenfold in terms of albums and merchandise. And I'm not knocking Glenn Danzig, right? He's awesome for what he is. But Danzig by itself doesn't deserve to be on that list. And again, they picked Cannibal Corpse. I understand what their niche was in the death metal scene, and I understand that. But if you're going to take Cannibal Corpse and you're not going to put Death on that list, why aren't you doing that, right? And Death did make the list, but I'm just saying, like, it's just a weird, like, why did they put in terms of like sheerness on there? And again, I'm a huge Converge fan, but they're bordering on the hardcore / almost punk rock scene than
Mhm.
they are metal, where a lot of these bands like Hatebreed would have been way more on album sales and merchandise over Converge. And I like Converge, but Hatebreed is the bigger band, right? Killswitch Engage is the bigger band. So if you're talking about album sales, ticket sales, touring, merchandising, you're putting Converge on there, which is a great band, but it's not better than Hatebreed or Killswitch. They're in that next level of hardcore bands, and none of them made the list. So why do you pick Converge over Killswitch or Hatebreed when they are the bigger bands and the more selling bands? So I just think this list was kind of like, just, I think, friends. Like if me and you said, let's make a top 40 list, right? And we were going to pick these bands. It's not the best band, it's the band we like the most. And I think that's where it kind of gets cheesy in this list a little bit, because like I said, when you're picking a top 10, most of the other bands are. Now, the one band that irritated me on this list, and I know it probably irritated you too as a top 10, is Tool, right? They're a great band. They are not top 10 metal bands of all times. What album sales, touring, they're not even close to that, yet they are a top 10 band. How does Tool get on that list? I just don't. And I'm not knocking Tool. I know you have your issues with Maynard and the stuff like that. But in terms of just pure band alone, right? Tool is a good band, maybe borderline great band, but they are not a top 10 in metal history. They don't make the top 10 in any of my lists, and I don't think of any true metalhead list they wouldn't make it. Now, Sepultura did make the list, but Soulfly didn't, and Soulfly is the bigger band with Max, right? So Sepultura, first 4 albums, awesome, right? When Max left the band, Soulfly took off. So Max is the driving force. So you're arguing an entire catalog of Sepultura, which Max was on the first 4 albums, and then you have the 5 Soulfly albums, which outsold the other Sepultura albums after Max left. You put Soulfly on the list before you put Sepultura. You're just going off a namesake. And again, I'm not knocking, Derek Green. He's a great singer, but he's not Max. It wasn't Sepultura as you and I know Sepultura. We are going with Beneath the Remains, Arise, those albums, Schizophrenia. We're not talking about the newest, latest. I can't even name it. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. I see all your points. In terms of how I approach my list that I did was not so much in who generated the most sales or whatever, right? I was trying to put myself in the mindset of Forbes a little bit, as in who created the economy, right? Black Sabbath, they've sold tons and tons of albums for sure, right? But the impact of what they did and how many, the market that they created was much larger than the output that they themselves did.
Right.
So when we're talking about Caius, for example, right? So Caius, in terms of the majority of all metal, right? It's pretty marginal, but Caius, they more or less created the genre of stoner rock, right? Which turned into a huge thing, which you could argue merged with the Melvin Sludge thing or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But it created its own thing. So not, Caius are lesser known, but Mastodon and a Wolf Mother and a whole bunch of those other bands would not have been around if it wasn't for Caius reviving the Black Sabbath sound and creating a modern way of doing that stonery, like dope smoking stuff. Yeah. You could say that Monster Magnet tried; they weren't as successful, right? But Caius really put it to that level where it's kept going ever since.
Stephanie, that's all good. You don't have to know much
was one of those people that he actually managed to get away from that and create a new thing called Queens of the Stone Age with the Desert Sessions in between. So he's actually managed to create two economies on his own in terms of metal revenue. So that's really what I'm thinking.
Right.
My list was more or less like, who are the bands that created these offsprings?
Right. So
That
let me play
the
devil's
virus, if
advocate.
you will.
Okay. So let me play devil's advocate on creating an economy and a drive forward. Wouldn't you then put Ozzy Osbourne number one over Black Sabbath? Because with Ozzy leaving Sabbath, getting replaced by the four other singers that they had, Ozzy on his own set the tone for everything from 1979 forward.
Yeah.
So he
I
by himself should be number one then, right? Ozzy
I
as a solo artist would be number
I
one over Black Sabbath.
I was totally going there. That's why I was even struggling on putting Dio on there, because Dio was part of Sabbath for a while.
Right.
But I was like, but Ozzy Osbourne wouldn't have been Ozzy Osbourne without him having been in Black Sabbath. So I was
But
like,
would he have?
like he didn't offshoot. That's why, like if I would have put Caius on there, would I also put Queens of the Stone Age on there, type of thing, right?
Okay, so
That's kind of like,
do
I
this.
thought I had Ozzy
Okay.
cornered in the Black
Let's
Sabbath. Like it was but Black Sabbath created the economy, which spawned Ozzy Osbourne, which spawned Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper had been around earlier, right? But Alice Cooper,
Right.
I don't think really found his ground until Ozzy did his thing, and Alice
Right.
Cooper was like, that's the formula, right? So. I kind of did a long extension of Black Sabbath there, so that's explanation for you.
Because again, too, right? Like we obviously we said we're sticking to heavy metal, and Led Zeppelin didn't make either of our list.
Fuck
But
no.
if you go to metal purist, right, and you say, give me the top three metal bands that started the genre, most people are going to tell you it's Black Sabbath, it's going to be Led Zeppelin, or arguably, I know you mentioned them before, but like a Deep Purple or like a Rainbow or like something that was earlier precursed to what metal would have become at that point. But they didn't put Led Zeppelin on that list. And I think because most people would argue hard rock versus heavy metal. But if you don't have Jimmy Page doing what he's doing in Led Zeppelin, you don't have the other veer of the hard rock and heavy metal scene. So they get left off the list because they're quote unquote not metal enough. But you have bands that, are argued that if you didn't have Led Zeppelin, you wouldn't have had those other bands.
Yeah, no, you may disagree on that one. I think that we would have been fine without Jimmy Page.
I don't know. I don't. Like I said, when you listen to the heavier Led Zeppelin stuff, and you listen to the way he played and the way they toned their guitars, the way John Bonham approached the drums, the only other person that I know that would in that era that would have been equally good to John Bonham would have been Keith Moon, right? You're in a totally different band, and one is a completely rock opera type thing. But when you look at their styles and their aggressiveness towards the kit, those are the top two drummers that come to mind. When you look at all the drummers before them and all the drummers after them, Keith Moon and John Bonham are the two that most drummers would say they are influences and idols, and nothing against Bill Ward of Black Sabbath, but he was not doing what Keith Moon and John Bonham were doing.
I totally agree with you about John Bonham. He's one of the heaviest drummers of all time. I don't agree with you on Jimmy Page. I also think that I'm not a Led Zeppelin fan. I'm sorry. I feel like they stole. I think they stole a lot. I mean, this is what I'm European. Europeans do this a lot. We take music from North America and we instill it. We dissect it and we try to improve on it. But I think Um, Led Zeppelin, they were famous and all that stuff, but I don't think that they're any heavier at all than the Jimi Hendrix experience. You know,
Right.
like
So
I think that I forget
if
his name, but the drummer for the three piece that Jimi Hendrix had at first, what a fucking fantastic drummer that guy is. And what an amazing bass player the Noel.
yeah,
Again,
I know what you're
I
talking.
forget
Yeah.
the names, but that trio, like it blows. I think blows everybody out of the water. And I think that Jimi Hendrix was definitely way more heavy metal in the early days than anything that Led Zeppelin did or whatever, without being an asshole about it. Led
No, I
Zeppelin
get
were
it. Right.
assholes.
Right. And so,
Um,
but then again, though, see, that's the thing now. You rewind from that to Jimi Hendrix, whose influence was Eric Clapton, whose influence was the Rolling Stones.
no,
So,
no,
I mean,
Jimi Hendrix influenced Eric Clapton. It was not the other way around,
yeah,
right?
no, but I'm saying like when you look at that genre of Cream being in the same era as Jimi Hendrix,
Right.
you're talking about two totally different bands, but Cream doesn't get their really kind of claim to in the sand
Yeah.
when
And
they were doing a lot
proto.
of
It's
much
like
harder
Chair and
things.
all those other bands that were playing heavy blues, right? That's
You
fine.
know,
They're playing blues with heavy guitar, but I still think that Jimi Hendrix, if you would, that would be the definitive pre Black Sabbath. What was metal before Black Sabbath? It would totally be Jimi Hendrix because he had those riffs. He didn't do like the darker side of it so much, right? You know, it was very bluesy,
yeah,
right?
no, I know what you're saying, but like it's hard pressed to say. And again, I'm a big Led Zeppelin fan and I'm a big Black Sabbath fan. But I don't think you can look at Geezer Butler in the same light that you look at Jimmy Page, right? Like their guitar playing styles are completely different. But if you're going to look at the better player, it's Jimmy Page all day long. Sabbath had that sound, but Zeppelin had like the eclectic mix. And the only thing that I like about Led Zeppelin that, Sabbath did it too, but like they really had that mysticism about them, right? Like the witchery and the occult and like all the stuff that followed Led Zeppelin, where Black Sabbath was just basically like people just thought that they were from the grave, right? Like that was nothing like anybody had ever heard before. So they both have their part in it, but it's just I find it weird that like a magazine like Forbes wouldn't have listed Led Zeppelin in there, but they put other bands that kind of don't make sense in there. And you're looking, like I said, I think our top five were relatively. I think our top three were the same three, just in different orders. But I mean,
Right.
like when you look at like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and Sabbath, right, as far as like metal goes, but then you have all these other bands that aren't metal. Why doesn't Led Zeppelin then make that list? If you're putting in bands like that aren't really, they're considered hard rock at that point, versus if you're going to go metal and extreme metal, then a lot of the bands that we have that even make our top 20 list wouldn't exist, right? Because if I'm going that route, I'm taking Rammstein out and I'm putting in Cradle of Filth, right? And I'm going to take off probably Typo Negative and insert a heavier band, right? Than that. So for genre speaking, like it's just a lot of it to me didn't make sense in terms of like the pecking order. And then a lot of there were 4 or 5 bands that I just kind of was scratching my head at, like, how in the world did these guys make the list? When, like I said, you have Testament, who didn't make the list, who should have been on that list for a plethora of reasons that weren't even close. They probably weren't in their top 50. If they were going to do a top 50 or a top 100 list, they might not even made the top 100 for Forbes. Yeah. And you just get bands that like I just don't realize. And I know we both agreed on Opeth, right? Like what they did for the black metal and the death metal and even kind of the hardcore
metal in general, right? Yeah.
I mean, how do they not make the list, right? And I'm not, like I said, I'm not knocking Gojira. and I'm not knocking the other bands that are on that list, but you can't put a band like, you know, what was the one? I can't think of the name of it now. They were later on in the list. I'm gonna look just because I'm cheating. Who was it? Where was it? Dream Theater, right? That was the one I was thinking of. You can't put Dream Theater on that list without having Opeth before that. And Dream Theater's been around for a while, right? Like Mike Portnoy's a great drummer. That Asian bassist that they have is out of this world. The guy's incredible. He plays a 7-string bass. They are an incredible band. But when you look at Opeth going all the way back to the early 90s, right? Like, they would take the cake over that. And again, same with like Nightwish, right? Nightwish was doing what Dream Theater was doing in the mid 80s, just not as Nightwish, right? They had a female singer. She was operatic. Like, they had all the pieces of the puzzle. For whatever reason, though,
Again,
these bands...
Again, we're talking about the you know, like from the Forbes perspective, which is
Sure.
where we started, right? Is that, you know, what was generated by these bands, right? And I feel like Opeth, you know, they're venerated and, you know, adored and admired by so many bands that have, you know, generated more money than Opeth ever did on their own, and in total, certainly many times more, right? But it's Opeth that got it going, you know, like, you know, Dream Theater, I think, you know, took the Opeth thing and sort of watered it down and made it accessible to like the big Pink Floyd audience, if you will, right? You know, the people that are like, ooh, I like your musicianship, and I don't have to listen to screamy vocals while listening to the shit you do, you know. But you see what I'm saying, right? You know,
so I get it, right?
So I think that the Opeth, while I have not listened to them enough, and it's one of those bands I have to listen to them more. But I feel like it takes dedication. Like I don't want to listen to Opeth casually. I want to, you know, dedicate myself to really pay attention and be in an environment where I can really like, you know,
And
like
again,
in the old days, you know, but like when you bought a record and it was like, I just spent a shit ton of money on this record, so I'm really going to make sure that it was worth my money.
And it's crazy because, like, I think personally, like, Opeth's Blackwater Park is one of the best start to finish albums of all time. Like,
a lot of people agree with you. I saw that on my TikTok post, by the way.
You know,
like quite a few.
That album is like you look at Dark Side of the Moon, right, from Pink Floyd, and every song on that album makes sense chronologically. Everything goes together. If you're going to have a story album and you're going to put it on play and listen to it for the next 59.5 minutes, I don't think there's a better album than Blackwater Park out there as far as like heaviness, melodic, death grinding vocals to, you know, I know they had the guy from the Screaming Trees sang on a couple songs. He did like the more operatic stuff.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. And so it's just from start to finish, it's a masterpiece, right? And it just kind of doesn't get the credit it deserves. And another one that I really love too, from start to finish, is Sentence's funeral album, right? It was their retirement album. And I know you mentioned that in one of your videos, like, should bands just retire and call it quits? Sentence did that. They were one of the first bands that I remember to say, this is our final album. We are not going on tour after this, and we will never make another album again. Now, the lead singer and the guitarist went and formed another band. They did other things, but they left Sentence be. They retired.
Perfect.
And it was an incredible album from start to finish. It was their masterpiece. It was their swan song, let's say. And it was perfect. And they left it there. They you know, like I said, the lead singer and the guitarist formed the Poison Black, which is awesome in its own right, but it's not Sentenced. And they left that be. They left that awesome thing. And again, and I know we talked about it, and it pains me, like Moonspell. They should have just left it. Like when they did the Eclipse album, that was a perfect album, and they should have just quit after that, right? But now they're doing Moonspell again, but it's not Moonspell. It's the one guy in the band or two guys in the band, right? It's a completely newer, younger band with two of the older guys. Like, and that's what I loved about Sentence. They called it quits. The other guys retired. They did their family thing, and the other guys that wanted to make music started a new band, and that's what they ran with. I don't see why more bands just don't do that, right? And there's and like I said, I'm not knocking the guys that music is their life, right? I just saw a video with Jack Osborne with Ozzy saying, "Hey, sign autographs. You know, you got to get." He's got the Rocky theme and he's lifting like a 2-pound weight or whatever. And I know they're making light of it, but like Ozzy has to call it quits, right? Like, let the old guy be the old guy and enjoy life until he passes away. Why are you putting him on stage and propping him up to try to sing a song, right? It's like, I don't get it. I mean, I get it, but it doesn't make sense. And you know, and I'm dating myself now, right? And I'm not saying anything about it, but have you seen all the videos with the guy from the Jersey Boys? I forget the Italian guy. He's like 91 years old, and it's all the memes are going around with "This is how I'm going to work on Friday," and it's basically the band, and he's got a microphone, and they're obviously playing the audio track in the back, and his lips aren't matching up to it. He's 90 years old, and he keeps going on. It's Frankie Valli, right? And I love Frankie Valli, right? But a 91-year-old Frankie Valli going on stage with a microphone with a backing vocal that he's not even syncing up with is pathetic. Let the old guy be. But somebody somewhere is forcing him on stage to make money off of his namesake. Why?
Yeah, unless he actually needs the money on his own.
He doesn't need the money. He's very well off, but somebody needs his money, and they're forcing him on stage to sing. It's elder abuse at this point.
Yeah, Aussie definitely doesn't need money anymore.
No.
I think it's difficult when you're a solo artist, when it's a solo name on there rather than the band name. Like, you know, Metallica, they could say that, okay, let's quit, let's stop doing Metallica. But hey, you know, Lars Kirk and
James and Rob,
and even James is like, you know, like, okay, let's do something. Let's call it, shit, fuck. I don't care. You know, like whatever, right? But it's like, you know, let's just leave the Metallica catalog alone. Everybody knows that we're still Metallica. We're still going to play Metallica songs live or whatever, right? But let's just, you know, let's leave the Metallica catalog. That's the legacy. Let's leave that, right? I think that would be fine, but that's just me. I'm not telling anyone to stop playing. I just think that, you know, some people are destroying their reputations and stuff, right?
And like that's the thing, right? Like I know we talked about this like one of our very first podcasts that we did together, but like Guns N' Roses, right? I'm a huge Guns N' Roses fan, but Axl in 2024 is not the same Axl of 1992, right? It's like his voice cracks. He sounds bad. He's like, it's almost like he strains his voice to be that guy. And it's like, at this point, I know it's a moneymaker and I know it's a global phenomenon and people still love seeing Guns N' Roses, but it's not Guns N' Roses. Just like the clip they showed from the other day when Motley Crue played the Troubadour, right? They sold out the band and they went through the front door and they like, it's a figment of what Motley Crue was. It is not Motley Crue, right? Vince Neil sounds terrible. Nikki Sixx looks like he's anorexic at this point. He's lost so much weight. Tommy Lee just looks aged. And they got John Five because Mick Mars is, you know, can't stand upright anymore.
He's
so it's
91.
like, you know, at that point, it's like, I understand you want to make the money and you want to live it, but like, it's just time to say go. And I'm a huge Motley Crue fan and a huge Guns N' Roses fan. But what they are now versus what they were are two totally different. And I will give credit where credit's due. Metallica still sounds great at 62 years old, right? Yeah. They still sound good. So even they might be slower to step and they might be a little bit more gray and they might be, when you see Metallica play, they play, right? Guns N' Roses isn't playing. It's struggle for me to watch them, you know. And I love Duff, I love Axl, I love Slash, right? But like, it's not the 1990 Guns N' Roses that we're all used to. It's a figment of that, and it's kind of heartbreaking to watch it.
Yeah. Hey, how about we think about okay, so we talked about the Forbes list and our version of the Forbes
Yeah.
list, but what if the Forbes list didn't exist? And we were thinking
Okay.
about metal for ourselves personally. I'm gonna put you on the spot here, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have to do a top 20. And maybe it will be the exact same list for you, but in terms of not thinking about influence, just thinking about, what it
Sure.
did to you, like your top 5 metal bands ever, right? No other criteria than they made me feel good and I like this band better than the other.
Okay.
Type of thing. Or
So
like
you're
these are
basically
my
saying, what are my
favorite
top five favorite
5.
bands then?
Let's not worry about revenue. Let's not worry about influence. Let's not worry about any of that stuff. Just like, these are my favorite top 5 metal bands, and I don't give a shit about what Forbes says. What would that
Okay.
be for you?
So Pantera is obviously number one. They
I
were
knew
what got
that.
me into
Yeah.
metal. I've seen them in an insane amount of times. They were the band that was like they got me into that kind of music, right? So Pantera is obviously my number one. My number two, after seeing them for as many years as I have, and as much as I like their albums and everything, I'm going to say Mushroom Head is number two. For me, everything
Couple
they've done,
weeks.
right, yeah. So everything they've done, I like. So I would say Mushroom Head is number two. If I'm going purely on what I enjoy and what I listen to, I'm going White Zombie, Rob Zombie, right? Like I loved everything that they've done since the beginning. I can listen to them all day long. More White Zombie than Rob Zombie put out a couple of those weird albums, but like I could listen to them all day long. And every album pretty much from start to finish. And I think I round out obviously with Opeth. I can listen to everything they've ever done. I love Opeth, and another band that kind of goes under the radar for me, but I love every one of their albums is Rammstein. I Du Hast came out when I was in college. It was 2001, and every DJ in every bar would play dance music, dance music, dance music. But Du Hast would find its way into the mix, and it was awesome to hear a metal album being played when it's 99% dance music, and the one song that they mix in it was Rammstein. So for me, those would be my top five as far as like what I like and what I can listen to, and there's a lot of other bands that would obviously be considered if I took one out and put one in, but every album of those artists that I mentioned, I've listened to all their albums from start to finish numerous times, and Pantera is my go-to. I can listen to Pantera all day every day and not get tired of it. I can cycle through even like their last album, Reinventing the Steel. I think it's one of their best albums. People always call me crazy. They're like, "Oh, well, Cowboys from Hell and Forward Display of Power," and I'm like, yeah, they're great albums, but like Reinventing the Steel, I can listen to start to finish all the way through. To me, I don't think Pantera's put out a bad album. I mean, in my opinion, that is where that's why I could never put Metallica on that list. They put out really crappy albums and I can't stand them. So every band that I mentioned, I could listen to on a continuous cycle and not get tired of any of the albums.
Yeah.
So that's it
Yeah.
for
No,
me. That's
yeah, and I think that's really awesome because the reason why I asked you this is because that I think that that's the essence of what this scene is all
yeah,
about.
I agree.
It is we don't give a shit about Forbes. We don't give a shit. I like and respect your top list, right? I really do. Um and I totally understand that that is your top list, and I think it's great. But my top list is different, and if I
Sure.
would give you a list today, it would be different tomorrow. I'm sorry, I do
Yeah.
not. Like if you were gonna return the question to me, I wouldn't be able to answer it the
Right.
same way today as I would tomorrow.
Sure.
Because it changes day to day depending on how I feel. And if you ask your neighbor or anyone
Yeah.
online or whatever, and I think
And,
that's the fucking beauty of it. It's like
Yeah.
And that's the essence of it. It's like, we don't give a shit about what
Right.
Forbes or what the economy, or that there are billboard lists that tell us one way or another that Dua Lipa is greater than Taylor Swift or whatever, right? It just doesn't fucking matter.
And to me, again, I love these bands, but that's the reason why I can't say Black Sabbath or Judas Priest would be in that list, because after Ozzy left Sabbath, I didn't like the other albums. I tried to listen to them. I just don't dig them. And when Rob Halford left Judas Priest and started his own Priest, right? I like Tim Ripper Owens just as much as the next guy, but he's not Rob Halford. And the two albums they made with him are awful, right?
Right.
I don't like them at all. So I can't even say Judas Priest, because out of all the albums that they've made, 3 of them don't have Halford on it, and that's who I like. So I would pick Fight maybe over Judas Priest, or maybe Halford as his own band, more than I would pick Judas Priest at this point.
I was talking to someone after you left at the Witches Market, by the way. My wife was playing at the Witches Market.
Yeah.
We were waiting. But there was a guy that was talking about Judas Priest at the time. And he said, after Rob Halford left, Judas Priest made 2 or 3 albums. And in the meantime, Rob Halford, at age 60 to 80 or whatever, right, released 8. And sold way more. Like, he had 3 bands and solo albums.
That's what I'm saying. So like,
Judas Priest could do nothing. So that proves.
I agree. So if people ask me,
Priest,
if I was going to take Judas Priest over Halford or Fight, I would pick Fight or Halford over Priest. Every Rob Halford solo album was fantastic.
I don't know those albums at all, but I know for a fact that Halford is Judas Priest.
Right. So here's what I'm going to do.
What would Judas Priest be without Rob Halford? Yeah, right. I mean, I'm sure that the other guys could write a song and they could play the guitars and whatever, right?
So here's what I'm going to do.
But without that frontman, they would be nothing.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. My challenge to you is, in the next week before we do our next podcast, you listen to the Fight album, Fight. It's self-titled, and you listen to Rob Halford's Resurrection.
Okay.
Now you give me 2 albums you think I should listen to, and I'll do that, and we'll compare and contrast. So I'm going a little bit more for Judas Priest, but like, if you listen to Rob Halford's Resurrection and you listen to Fight, I would put those 2 albums against any Judas Priest album as being better.
Okay. You took me off guard, so I'll have to think about mine. Okay. Obviously the first thing that comes to mind is Iron Maiden Killers, which didn't have Bruce Dickinson on vocals, but it's generally a good album, but it's a little too obvious. I'll have to think about something more creative.
Thanks,
but
Tiffany.
That's a good challenge. I accept it.
And again,
I will send it back to you. I could also suggest that in addition to that, we could have a topic of what bands would not be what they were without one key member, as in like we know Pantera, for example, they had 2 key members to me, right? And it was Dimebag and
Vinny,
Phil. And sure, Guns N' Roses had Slash and Axl or whatever, right? But what I was just saying, like, Judas Priest, what would they have been without Rob Halford, for example, right? Like, we could it's something to think about, like, what bands were really formed around just one person but were called band.
And again, right, it's a kind of an eclectic way to think about it, right? Because the bands that had bands together, as we know them as bands, when they broke away and they had their replacement, was the replacement better or worse than the original, right? So that's kind of the big thing, right? Now, when you look at a band, let's say like Sabbath, right? They've had 4 singers, and none of them, in my opinion, were as good as Ozzy. Whereas Ozzy's solo stuff was better than Sabbath, in my opinion. I liked all of his solo albums more, whether he had Randy or Zach or Jakey Lee, whoever was playing on the albums at the time, right? So I would take that over that. But I'm the same way with Iron Maiden, right? Like, everybody recognizes Bruce Dickinson, but Paul Di'Anno was their original singer, and Blaze Bayley sang on one of arguably the heaviest Iron Maiden album, right? So when you look at, in terms of like heaviness and sheer power, Blaze that album blew up. That was super heavy. Sign of the Cross was all over MTV. That was a really heavy song, right? Far heavier than anything with Bruce Dickinson had ever been. And Iron Maiden's a heavy band, right? So that could be said for a lot of the bands out there, right? Like, Dio, he could have been in any band, but his Dio band, after his namesake, that's who the band was after, right? He could have had any 5 musicians play with him. Dio's the voice.
Yeah. No, and Entombed lost LG Petrov for a while too, right? But some people say that, some of the albums that he wasn't singing on are some of their better albums, and I would tend to disagree, for example, right?
Yeah.
But Iron Maiden is a good example, right? Where it's like you have a band basically of superstars. Everybody knows all the members of Iron Maiden, except for the stand-in singer so much. I mean, you're into it, right?
Yeah.
So but I wouldn't. It's like, it's not Iron Maiden if Bruce Dickinson isn't playing. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's
so a perfect example, right?
Or, all the other names that are in there. So it's still not,
Yeah. So mentioning what you just did before, right? The one band that comes to the mind right off the top of my head is Slayer, right? No one can replace Tom Araya. When he left the band, Slayer quit. They got a new bassist. They got a new drummer. Kerry King's always been their guitarist, but they replaced Hanneman, right? They had a stand-in bass when Tom Araya hurt his shoulder and his neck and he couldn't play bass, but you can't replace his voice. Tom Araya leaves the band, Kerry King starts another band. He can't sing in Slayer. You can't do it.
Slayer, I think they were a little bit lucky because Hanneman was the Slayer guy. Like he wrote most of the songs and most of the stuff was Hanneman, right? But Araya had that vocal ability, and Kerry King complemented and was so sort of in sync with Hanneman that they could go on after his departure, right? So they got a little bit, they dodged the bullet a little bit there, I think.
But that's what I'm saying. When Tom Araya said,
but that's one of those interesting things where it's like it could have been, a lesser guitar player that totally could have made things go away. Like Dark Angel, what would they be without Gene Hoglan? Type thing. Would they still be a good thrash band? Yeah, they would be. Would they be as big and famous as they are without Gene Hoglan? No. Probably not.
No. And then another one that comes to mind, right, where he is the front piece of the band and you don't have anybody else, is Dave Mustaine, right? He's that every other musician play with him except sing. He's the vocal point of the band. Whether you like him or not, he's that driving force behind Megadeth. If you don't have Dave Mustaine, you don't have Megadeth. He's kicked every other member out and replaced them altogether and still thrives on his Megadeth. That's his baby, right? He is Megadeth.
What would Meshuggah be without Thomas Hake on drums?
Yeah. Nothing, right? You can't have it, right?
Some quick easy answers is I don't know, but like we'll think about it during the week and see if that's a topic that's worth exploring or not,
let's do
or
it.
think of something better. But it would be cool to think about. But
so what do we want to do? Do we want to?
I will listen to Fight and Rob Halford. You're gonna have to text me.
I'll send it to you.
Details. But I'll listen to that and I'll tell you. Are we going to aim for Thursday this week?
That's what I was going to say. Let's try Thursday at 7 or 7:30. We'll see how it goes. We'll try
Central,
something new.
That is, yeah.
Yeah, Central Time. Yeah, so we'll do it Thursday. And there's a great video. I just saw it the other day. Fight played, I don't remember if it was Saturday Night Live or they played one of like a different show. They were the band on the show, and Halford was awesome in that. Like, I'm just saying, you're going to like Fight. You might put the Judas Priest albums down and start listening to Fight and Halford.
I never did, but he's always on. I have to give you a really quick little fun story.
Yeah.
In the mid '90s, I had a fanzine, and uh, there was a disco club place, but Saxon were gonna show up and play there.
Really?
So it's like, oh shit, I gotta go see Saxon.
That's awesome.
And we were gonna interview them too. So a buddy of mine managed to get a backstage pass to go talk to them. I didn't, but I was the photographer. Here's the funny thing. My camera had just broken, so my good camera was gone. So what could I do? Nobody else had a camera. I went to the fucking convenience store and got one of those paper one-time use cameras, and stood by the station, one of those little teeny tiny things to take pictures of Saxon. You know, Biff Byford, professional as he is, he didn't give a shit that I was standing there with like a dollar store paper camera. He was posing like I was the only one taking pictures, and he was like, he was posing like crazy. Fucking pro. That's so fucking awesome. Oh my gosh. But it just reminded me, just because Halford is a pro through and through, and all those guys are like, I don't give a shit if you have a paper camera. I'm gonna fucking perform the best I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, just fun memory. Cool. All right. Well, let's see you Thursday, and I hope everybody else that joined here will come back and subscribe and follow all of us on our various accounts.
So to follow that up, this video, I'll download it. It'll be on the Podcult YouTube channel. So it's PODKVLT, the Podcult. I'll link it in my One Fun Guy podcast, but I'll link it there too. So I'll put all of our bios in the link. So go over to our YouTube channel, the Podcult, subscribe, like the videos. Everything we do here goes on there. And I just think that like having us here on TikTok, doing our podcast here as opposed to doing it on StreamYard via Facebook, I think this is much more interactive. And I think you're right with the Thursday, right? Because people are busy on Saturday nights, right? It's movie night, date night, whatever. So we'll try something different, but it's easier to download the video from TikTok and upload it to YouTube than it is to go to another platform. That's why we do this. So even though I'm the One Fun Guy podcast and Kel's on his own thing, we can't be the Podcult together here, but it's easier to download it and upload it than it is doing anything else. So that's why we opted to go this platform. So in case you guys were wondering, our YouTube channel still lives on. That's where this video will go. But we do it this way because it's just easier for us to interact with you guys and be seen and shared. And then we can take clips of this video and post it on our own perspective TikTok channels because we're all trying to grow, right? So this is what we do. So I hope you guys understand this is why we're doing this. It was planned this way. So.
And it's good times. Thank you so much.
It's super fun, right? And
thanks people for watching. Thanks Mark for
absolutely
setting all this up, and it's all great.
So to follow this up, guys, Thursday night, it'll be a different time. Normally we do it Fridays or Saturdays. We're going to do it Thursday at, let's just say 7:30. Is that good? We'll do 7:30. So Thursday, 7:30 Central Standard Time, we'll be on TikTok Live. We'll talk music. We'll talk hard rock, heavy metal, punk, the whole thing. We got some stories to tell. We'll do our thing, and we will have a great show. So we'll see everybody on Thursday night. Thank you guys for joining in. I hope you have a fun rest of your weekend and a safe one. And if you guys are off on Monday for the holidays, enjoy the Monday. We will be back on Thursday as the Podcult. So we'll see everybody then.
Happy Thanksgiving, Canada.
All right. All right. I'll see you guys.
Cheers.